Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is The Pipeline for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition by Critical Hit Publishing. Okay, first a bit of history. Released in 2018 as part of Chaosium's Miskatonic Repository project, The Pipeline is an 82-page adventure set in Canada in the mid-1980s. There will be spoilers from this point forward, so stop watching now if you intend to play this. Right, to the cover. Here we have a piece by author Alex Guillot, which is okay while perhaps not setting the world aflame. Okay, to the inside. Once we get past the fairly minimal credits and contents, we get to the introduction. It explains that the scenario was one that explores the concept of survival and about how the environment helps to set the mood. It talks about implementing the rule of three, that being if you're running a realistic setting, the players only have a single chance to overcome it. If it's less lethal but gritty, then 2 chances, and for pulpy cinematic style games to allow 3 chances. This chance is a skill or ability check, and it is proposed that it is used in the other direction when the player wants to perform a stunt, with only one roll being required to do multiple things to have a single outcome. It does suggest agreeing this with your players beforehand so they know what to expect. The next thing it moves on to are environmental hazards. These are used to challenge the player, and it describes them as occasionally needing their own initiative score to remain consistent round by round. Each entry has different caveats associated with them, such as even the odds, where each potential target rolls a die and even numbers are not affected, or fumble crit, where criticals or fumbles can change the in-game effects. Each of the Arctic hazards has a number of things associated with them. It then goes through some definitions such as despair, exhaustion, bonus dice and the like, but also includes things like frostbite and hypothermia with the in-game effects listed. The next section is Arctic hazards, where it gives details on how to handle the various things that the environment throws at the players throughout the course of the scenario. These are really well written with a paragraph of flavour text for each one and how to use them. It covers the usual things such as avalanches, blizzards, ice cliffs and the like. They contain rules which you could pretty much use in any game where such environmental hazards are present and are well thought out. Okay, so after this we move on to the scenario itself. Set in the mid-1980s, The Pipeline has the backdrop of the wilderness of British Columbia in Canada. It centres around the controversy surrounding the construction of a new oil pipeline and the environmental impact it has, not to mention that it passes through lands sacred to the Tahltan tribe. To make matters even more complex, a radical environmental group that are partial to using violence to achieve their ends are involved. The day before the pipeline was due to come online, all communication was lost. The owners, Exxon, have sent in a team to investigate in order to avoid a PR disaster. The radical environmental group, the North Wind, are not adverse to using sabotage and violence to achieve their goals. They are made up mostly of members of the Tahltan tribe, with non-tribal members recruited due to their skill set. They have a history of sabotaging oil fields in Canada, Alaska and North Dakota. In recent memory, they made national headlines by causing the deaths of 3 Exxon employees and injuring another 23, knocking out the facility for 6 months and costing them millions. Both the FBI and CSIS have been trying to track them for the last few months, but with little in the way of progress. Unbeknownst to most, the North Wind is actually a cult of Ithaqua who believe that they can restore Alaska and Canada to the wilderness it once was. They learned that Exxon's pipeline had uncovered an ancient structure, suspecting it was devoted to Ithaqua. They managed to infiltrate Exxon with some of their own people, and 2 of them were hired as pipeline walkers, while another was hired as a documentary maker to produce something on the positive impact of oil pipelines. Exxon agreed to allow them access to their facilities on the agreement that they would have final approval of the end product. Over the following weeks, the cultists managed to excavate the temple, uncovering a thick copper-plated book that was bound in elk skin, Revelations of Ahisar. They began translating this foul tome, with one of their number committing suicide due to the strain of the profane knowledge within. 10 days ago, the cult performed a ritual from within the book to create an elixir that allowed them to manifest the Urayul, a terrifying yeti-like creature. The cultists assumed that they would be able to summon these beasts to serve them. However, they were gravely mistaken, as when they drank the elixir they began to slowly and painfully transform into the Uriel themselves. One of the cultists, William, the documentary maker, was spared this fate as he lost his nerve when seeing the others transform and fled into the wilderness. The following night, the Uriel attacked the town of Telegraph Creek. 3 were killed and taken to the Temple of Ithaqua, and the others are in hiding. 8 nights ago, they slaughtered all but 2 people at the main pumping station. These 2 were taken to the temple for sacrifice. A week ago, Exxon became concerned when the inspectors didn't check in and so decided to send in a recovery team. William is still alive in the woods, but the Uriel are hunting him down. After this, we move on to the prologue. Here we discover that the investigators have been hired by Exxon to investigate the sudden loss of communication with their site in British Columbia. The North Wind are suspected, and with their past record, Exxon are taking no chances. The team is an electrical engineer, 2 mechanical engineers, a survival expert, 6 private security specialists, and a company representative to handle any negotiations or relations. After a short period of time to prepare, they will all board a DH-6 Twin Otter ski plane and leave Vancouver at around 6 am. They land in Telegraph Creek around 8:50 am and then take the service road of 25 miles to the pumping station. It gives us some other character options and then moves on to day 1, the crash. The investigators wake up with the sound of howling wind and creaking metal, upside down and belted into their seats, with someone screaming nearby. They quickly discover that their plane has crashed into the slope of a mountain and that the pilot is missing and that they are the only survivors. If they manage to get out of the wreckage in safety, they can discover with the correct rolls that there is a huge hole in one of the engines. Should they manage to gather together their weapons and equipment, they will find no signs of food or water and will need to work out where they are while being exposed to the elements. They should eventually find the pipeline itself in the valley below and can begin following it. They need to traverse through knee-deep snow for 14 miles, which should take them around 14 hours. They face a number of environmental events such as a raging river and a cliff of ice, but should at the end of the day be able to set up a camp somewhere. It gives some events that are designed to play on the investigators' paranoia that the keeper should use throughout the day, such as an eerie scream heard in the distance, discovering the remains of a freshly killed moose with its innards scattered about, and a large stone being thrown from somewhere nearby. The next section details night number 1, the red sky. It gives us some notes on how to deal with the deep cold that the sunset brings about, as well as the encroaching hunger and thirst, and similarly gives a number of night events, things like disturbing dreams of a humanoid shape on the horizon, a terrible howling in the distance, and even things like frostbite. Again, all designed to unnerve and inconvenience the investigators. Then moves on to day 2, the journey. We have much of the same journey through the snow following the pipeline. Around 2 hours after moving on, they find a body hanging from the pipeline by its own entrails, the pilot from the plane. He's been completely eviscerated. Observant investigators will note some symbols painted on the pipe with blood. The symbols are Aklo, and those that are knowledgeable will discover that they say, "He is coming, this land will be free, the blood of the interlopers will open the way." Those that know about the North Wind will recognise this as one of their propaganda quotes. There are 2 other challenges that the players face, a whiteout and an attack by a wounded grizzly bear, and then we move on to the second night, noises in the dark. We have more of the same with howls, rocks being flung and the deep cold affecting them, alongside the hunger and thirst that they are suffering, and then we move on to day 3. In the morning, they will come upon the place that they've been sent to investigate, the pumping station. Taking the direct route through the nearby forest will take around 2 hours, and it's on this part of the journey that they find a destroyed and deserted campsite. There's blood and gore everywhere, and it has been wrecked. If they search amongst the shredded tents, they can find a video camera with a loaded cassette. Viewing this will show the Earth First group for the documentary setting up camp discussing their plans. Observant investigators will spot a tall, hairy figure amongst the trees. They'll find a map of the area and one of the activists' journals. Among the usual personal things one would expect to find, they'll discover reference to a Native American legend, a spirit called the Uriul, a defender of the forest. If a hard search is passed, they find the survivor, Bill. He will tell the investigators that he is a videographer who stepped away from the camp for a moment when a wild bear attacked. He hid in the snow shelter and has been surviving on their supplies for days. The players may not trust Bill, who is actually William Harris, a fanatic of the North Wind. The Uriul are hunting him and he is desperate. He has a dose of the elixir on him. He will try and ingratiate himself with the party and trick one of them into drinking the elixir to appease Ithaqua. If attacked by the Uriul, he will drink it himself out of desperation and start transforming into one of them. Should the investigators follow the pipeline instead, they will get the feeling that they are being watched, and decent spot hidden rolls will reveal several figures in the woods. Eventually they should arrive at Exxon Pumping Station number 31. From a distance, something is noticeably not right, with the gates being bent and twisted and some of the doors wide open. The place is mapped out here. It then goes on to describe each location with a breakdown of the state that it's currently in, as well as what clues can be picked up to give a hint of what happened. The first point of interest is Bunk Room 1, where the investigators can come upon a young man hidden behind some footlockers. This is Daniel Baxter, and he is one of the activists that fled the camp when the Uriul attacked. He is now almost catatonic with fear and insanity, and though at first almost a liability, he will open up after a few hours. He can tell them about snow monsters that ripped flesh and crunched bones. In Bunk Room 2 they will find the body of Anna Levesque, the inspector that was sent to the station. Amongst her notes they will find a rough sketch depicting a stone altar piled with bones, and a second page holds a description of a strange temple. When the players move over to the pump building they will find the door ripped off from the outside, but the electrical systems are working fine, though the wiring in some rooms has been ripped from the panels. The radio shack is a scene of horror, with blood covering every surface and a badly mutilated body contained within. The radio equipment has been smashed, though there are 2 working CB radios. Further exploration will find the body of the station manager, who appears to have taken his own life. If the investigators manage to crack the password on his computer, they will discover some emails from the Exxon office talking about a potential archaeological site that shows signs of ancient human sacrifice, as well as an incident where a worker was allegedly killed by a bear. They were carrying an obsidian disc pictured here, which was taken from the dig site. After this, we move on to the garage and maintenance area. Within the garage, they can find a large crate with fragile stenciled on the side. Inside it is an enormous skull, vaguely human-shaped. It would have stood 10 to 15 foot tall when alive. It looks to an expert like something from an unknown primate. There's also a series of underground rooms to be explored. These are generally untouched and contain engineering and water recovery systems. We then move on to Night 3, the attack. By the time they've finished exploring the pumping station, darkness will be falling. At the station there is hot water, food and warm beds, and investigators should realise that this is the safest place for them at the moment. Unknown to them, the Uriul have been watching them from the trees the whole time. They are not mindless creatures and are possessed with an otherworldly cunning and intelligence. They will want to divide the party and take them out separately, and this section of the scenario gives some encounters and tactics that they will use to do so. Should the investigators take down one of the Uriul and stick around, they will witness it transform back to its human host. Interestingly, this section mentions that should any of the party go public with this, they're likely to get a visit from Delta Green or the like. Should they survive the night, we move on to Day 4, Telegraph Creek. The clues that they have gathered so far lead them to the Cave Temple and Telegraph Creek. It gives some additional clues that could draw the investigators here if need be, as well as a few things that could help them along the way, such as an abandoned snowcat, a cave for shelter, and Martin Lambert, a wilderness guide who is on his way to the pumping station to get help. When they arrive at Telegraph Creek, they will find it largely abandoned since the Uriul attack. What remains of the town is residing in Martin's sturdy log cabin. The survivors have seen the Uriul in the flesh and think they are the mythical Yeti. They can learn that 2 of the townsfolk were taken alive by the creatures. If they offer to rescue them, Martin will offer the use of 3 snowmobiles and escort them to the cave. Should the keeper want to apply a bit of pressure to proceedings, it details an Uriul ambush which can take place at either the cabin or on the journey to the cave. The next section details the cave itself. The entrance is a black opening which emanates a foul, rancid odour. There's a large crimson handprint above the entrance, which is triple the size of a normal hand. Those who listen carefully here can faintly hear a scream from a young girl from deep within, and a random item can be found at the entrance as listed here. And additionally, the entire cave is mapped and scaled out here. It details the various passageways that the investigators can explore. If they follow the young girl's voice, it leads to a chamber with a floor as smooth as glass. Here they can encounter a horrific mythos creature called a Borean spider, a gigantic, hellish, sanity-draining monstrosity that mimics human voices to lure them to their death. It's worth pointing out that the whole area is riddled with dimensional anomalies, which is what has allowed the Borean spider to enter our reality. They are intelligent and have a paralysing bite. Victims can be pulled through to Borea, with the intense cold killing them within a minute. The next thing detailed is the Temple of Ithaqua. It sits within a titanic cavern lit by an eerie blue light. At the end there's a vast Hyperborean cathedral with 2 8-storey pillars flanking a wide dais which is reached by a set of white stairs. The cold is almost unbearable here and they can easily become hypothermic. If they manage to investigate the dais, they will discover 8 sets of manacles attached to it and a large closed tome. This is the revelation of Ahisar detailed here. Anyone touching the altar will instantly flash freeze, killing them. If they arrive at nightfall, they can see 6 Uriul at the altar holding dark dagger-like things. They are chanting in a low voice, and 6 figures are manacled to the altar. The Uriul are totally immersed in the ritual, though there are 2 at the bottom of the stairs who are capable of fighting without disrupting proceedings. If the Uriul attending the ritual are reduced to 2, they will summon a Nopket to assist. The ritual takes around an hour. If the investigators either slay the Uriul, destroy the altar, or even as a last resort kill the sacrifices, this will foil their plans. It gives various options and outcomes that the investigators can try, including blowing up the caves with dynamite in order to stop the ritual. It goes on to detail the rest of the caves. There is a fungus cave with strange bioluminescent mushrooms that can infect the investigators with spores and will ultimately kill them if they're not treated with antibiotics. There's a tunnel which leads to a 10,000-year-old burial chamber. There's the Vault of Ahisar, which has painted images on the walls which detail all of the secret lore passed to him. It is rendered in blood and pitch, and it tells of a decadent world ending in ice and the return of Ithaqua. There is an abattoir full of partially eaten elk, bears and humans, and a supply room which contains a sleeping Uriul. The next section deals with the room that the sacrifices are being kept in. They can find 6 of them huddled together for warmth in fresh animal skins that are contained in rough metal cages that are bent closed. The sacrifices are mostly catatonic, though will be easily led by the investigators if they wish to escape with them. If any of them see an Uriel, they will try to violently flee the creature screaming in terror. On the far side of the caverns they can find the North Wind Camp. It is covered in bioluminescent spores and what is left of the Uriel elixir. A number of useful items such as snowshoes and cold weather clothing can be found here. After this we have a dead-end cave that contains a tunnel underfoot at the end. A formless spawn has a lair here and it was placed here to guard the passage. After this we move to the conclusion of the scenario. It gives us 7 different options as to the outcome, which ranges from the investigators killing the Uriel, stopping the ritual and rescuing all of the survivors, to them making the ultimate sacrifice and stopping the ritual at the cost of their own lives. There are other possible combinations of outcomes that are not detailed here but mentioned as a possibility. Following on from this we have the timeline from the 2nd of September 1986 where the Temple of Ithaqua is discovered right through to the ritual on the 31st of October. This leads on to some really well done handouts and a section of NPCs, the stats for the Uriel and a new career, the Arctic Guide, as well as the game stats for the new equipment for the scenario such as frostbite salve and snowshoes. As a standalone scenario, the pipeline is actually pretty good. It sets its stall from the beginning and never shies away from being exactly the kind of adventure you would expect, one that has all of the genre tropes associated with a bleak snowy wilderness. Things like the environment being as much of a threat as the horrors that lurk within it, the feeling of being watched and followed by a horrible creature that seems to do just fine out there, and human greed and hubris being responsible for the death of innocents. The influences from the movies and media are evident throughout, with elements of John Carpenter's The Thing being obvious, though this doesn't prevent it from being creepy or horrific. I'm not really sure why the author chose to set the scenario in the mid-1980s, as there's little there to give it the flavour of the time period, and this could have just as easily been set in the present day with almost no adjustments. It's my hope that seeing that it is set in this era would not be something that would put off a prospective buyer. Aside from the fairly plain cover, the interior art is really nicely done, with it all being done by the writer, and it sets the scene well. The NPCs are nicely realised, with perhaps the only misstep being that one of them is a web designer, which I'm not sure was a valid profession in 1986. Additionally, all of the communications with Exxon are done via email, another thing that wasn't about back then. As far as this kind of scenario goes, there are a number available with similar themes. Things like Beyond the Mountains of Madness, Trail of Tsathoggua and Pagan Publishing's Walker in the Wastes. However, these are difficult to get hold of and expensive when available, whereas the pipeline is quite cheap, is print on demand and also fully compatible with Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. The pipeline isn't going to win any awards for originality, but what it does really well. I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Also, if you're interested in buying this product, I've put some links below. Lastly, if you like what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon. Bud out.